This bill, in a slightly different form, came up in the last session. It made it through the State Government Committee. Worked very diligently with the Auditor General's team in pulling this together. And candidly, we got a great amount of feedback on this bill and the next bill from Representative Solomon and Representative Delicio as well. What this bill does is it enshrines a capability with the Auditor General and provides us with the ability to conduct a much more in-depth level of investigation when there's a problem in different types of activities and gives a much more meaningful issue. And the reason I bring it up is many people have a misunderstanding of what an audit does versus a fraud audit and a forensic audit. When you get a regular audit done, it is not a fraud audit and it is not a forensic audit. There are much more detailed levels of investigations. This bill provides that kind of capability, and again, the Auditor General has worked with us diligently on this. The subpoena power is new. I do want everyone to be aware, though, you can't do a fraud or forensic audit effectively without the ability to issue a subpoena.
In reference to the subpoena power, is that a tool that's used as a last resort, or is that a tool that is used initially? Subpoena, by its nature, for me, connotes something that's a little bit more hostile than friendly. So I'd like to understand the circumstances under which that subpoena power might be used.
Generally speaking, a subpoena would only be used in the case there was a hostile environment, and I would not envision that it would be done very often. Most times people will comply, and the knowledge or the perceived threat that a subpoena can be issued usually causes people to comply beforehand. But it's when someone is not. It's typically done in the case of a fraud investigation or fraud audit where you already suspect one way, shape, or form that something would be problematic.
And is there a process by which subpoena is issued? I think in my head, I'm thinking of all these police dramas, courtroom dramas, but can you describe a little bit of the process that's used that would issue this subpoena in this context?
If this bill became law, then what would happen is that would be developed as part of a normal subpoena power process that's being done with the current Attorney General's office, and it would be issued in a way that they would make an application to a court, get the subpoena issued, and then go ahead and issue it to the agency that would be involved. I would be very surprised, though, candidly, that would occur, because generally speaking, unless there was a hostile relationship between the agency and the executive branch, that usually the governor's office would suggest to somebody if there's a fraud involved or suspected, I have to be careful, fraud suspected, that someone would want to make sure that they've worked with the administration on being able to get the appropriate level of legal counsel and advice up front, and they would negotiate it before issuing that. And I would suggest that it's typically done as a last resort.
Forensic fraud audits. Let's say you've got a college grad, he's working for, he or she go to the auditor's office, and on their desk you say, hey, conduct this forensic audit. What could that individual with just a college degree do today, and what would they be able to do if they got these certifications?
First of all, under the legislation now, they can't do anything because they would not be qualified to perform a forensic audit. And generally speaking, that is something that requires someone with significant experience and be certified as a CPA to be able to conduct that type of an audit investigation. If the person were properly licensed by the Department of State, they would, with supervision, be able to handle certain aspects of it. But currently, there's very limited forensic and no fraud audit work that's currently being done by the Auditor General. So this would actually be a new capability in the process. And there's a certified fraud examiner system that's established as part of that. And there's regular procedures under auditing standards about how to conduct both predominantly a forensic audit, which is one step above a normal audit. That's when you're recreating files. You're trying to figure out what happened. So as an example, say if in the Lebanon County earned income tax case as an example, They couldn't figure out what actually transpired. So a forensic investigation would actually recreate the books and records. From that, it could lead to a fraud investigation, which is one in which there's very detailed processes that are done with the advice of counsel for the preservation of evidence. There's a methodology where hard drives, as an example, would be sequestered because once the evidence is tainted, it would no longer be able to, as you know, because you're an attorney, would no longer be able to be used in any criminal prosecutions. Forensic audits may or may not be able to go to a criminal prosecution state. A fraud audit could typically be done that way, but it's done from the basis of working with appropriately licensed attorneys to make sure that they've preserved the evidence for any future type of criminal investigation or prosecution that may be required.
And what will be the cost of implementation?
The cost of implementation of this would not be significant initially, although there would be some budgetary line items to get certified fraud examiners. But it would be done on a case-by-case basis as the Auditor General found it deemed necessary. So I would envision what would typically happen is the Auditor General would start to designate with his staff of professional development who they would want to select to get that certified fraud examiner capability. And if the Auditor General, in conducting a normal audit, felt a much more detailed audit would be prescribed, they would then go out and proceed to have that done. Initially, I would suspect what would occur is that the Auditor General would say, let's wait to see how much need we have for it in terms of a capability, and then specific budgetary items would start coming about in future years as it came about. They would probably initially outsource it, and they currently do that with the relationships they have with the state auditors now and other agencies that are being audited as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Grove.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is a thing called a friendly subpoena. That friendly subpoena would be if you have a state contractor whom you want to get information from, but they don't necessarily want to have retribution for providing information, so you would subpoena them to get the information. How the Auditor General would probably use this, because he has full access to all the papers and documents of the Commonwealth already. You're probably talking about private entities that contract with the state or have received grants from the state. If they're not giving up information, you would then go subpoena those private entities. That's probably where the subpoena power is going to come in, because he already has the ability to look at all the finances, all the documents of the Commonwealth to begin with. It just adds that power for the vendors and contractors of the state. And to the forensic audit, let's say you have a city in Pennsylvania that didn't know what happened to $33 million during their CAFR, which is an audited process. The next step would be a forensic audit. Yeah, a forensic audit to figure out what happened to that $33 million, and in case of they suspect some maybe embezzlement, they would take the next step to the fraud level. So that's where the forensic would come in. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Grove. Representative Dush.
Thank you. And actually, I was going to bring up the friendly subpoena as well. And I'll go to the executive side. There are state employees that right now would like to give information out to an auditor or even the legislature, that when they're asked to come for a hearing, or if they're asked to come and speak with the auditor, the boss is standing over them saying, you realize you're being asked. You don't have to go down there. You understand that, right? Well, the implication is that whistleblower protections or not, if you go down there and tell them what's actually going on here, you're not going to have a job. We will find a way to get rid of you. It's why a lot of our state employees who actually do want to give us information, I've got a list of from a couple of different departments, but until there's that kind of protection for them, they're not willing to come. They've got families to take care of. So that kind of protection for those state employees and other government officials, that's necessary. When the Auditor General would, if he were to issue subpoenas to several different people in a classification, you never know where the information actually came from. But now if you've got several people saying the same information, then those people who are doing things that are not supposed to be happening, that's going to come out. So the friendly subpoenas, if you're going to start seeing some, you'll see a lot more transparency, and I think you'll have a lot less frustration within the regular rank and file employees within the executive branch if the truth starts coming out on some things where they know that they haven't had a voice up to that point.
Thank you. Representative Hohenstein? Representative Kenyatta?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have there been examples of the Auditor General requesting information and it not being provided? And could you speak to some of those examples?
I can't just speak to specific examples, but from what the Auditor General's staff and the Auditor General has shared with me in the past, there have been a number of cases where that's occurred. But I will tell you this, there's been cases where they've wanted to do forensic audits and fraud audits where they did not have the authority and the ability to pull that off. A lot of cases, what's happened before is they've had to refer those to the Attorney General's office for other type of prosecution.
If a crime is discovered, that would be a referral to the AG anyway, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Chairman Boyle?
Just wanted to thank Representative Ryan for bringing this bill. I think it's a needed bill, and I think it'll really bring the Auditor General's office into the 21st century. I think it'll professionalize what had been in the past partially a patronage operation, and what we need are qualified people doing these audits, and I think this bill will help bring us there.
Thank you very much.